Ah, oh, that's hot. That's hot.
Everybody loves a good underdog story. Whether it be Morocco being the first African team to reach the semi-finals in this year's World Cup, the 1 to 5,000 odds of Leicester City winning the BPL in 2016, or the London Spitfire finishing top 6 in the Overwatch League. And the latter is what we're here to talk about. Why did every single content creator, except for myself of course, I'm definitely not smug about that, predict the Spitfire coming dead last or basically dead last? What obstacles did the Spitfire have to overcome physically, mentally and physically, and how was this underdog story even possible? I've been lucky enough to land an interview with head coach and coach of the year, Christopher, from the London Spitfire to help dissect all of this, and sections of the interview will be peppered throughout. If you want to see the full thing, click in the top right. I plan to split this video up into 7 parts. Firstly, quickly recapping the Spitfire's performance in 2021 and why it actually wasn't as bad as people made it out to be. Then I'll move on to the predictions for the Spitfire in 2022 and the reasoning people gave for their placements. The next 4 sections are dedicated to detailing and analysing the performance, hurdles, failures and successes of the Spitfire in each stage, and the last section, and perhaps the most important, concluding the success of the Spitfire, the key factors in the 2022 run, and what the future holds for them. This entire video has been heavily inspired by Amazon Prime's All or Nothing series, so sit back, relax, grab some snacks and a drink, and let me tell you about the greatest underdog story in all of esports, the London Spitfire. I think it's absolutely key to begin with a quick recap of how the Overwatch League community perceived the performance of the 2021 Spitfire, considering it fueled a lot of the reasoning for the perception of the Spitfire in 2022. On paper, the Spitfire were joint the worst team in the Overwatch League alongside the Vancouver Titans, with a 1-15 record and a -35 map differential. However, you need to dig below the numbers to see that the Spitfire were actually a much better team than the numbers would let you believe. First off, on June the 10th, 2021, Sparker, a hitscan prodigy from London Spitfire's academy team, British Hurricane, finally turned of age to get to play on the big stage, and his addition to the team certainly helped improve the Spitfire's mid-season performance. Secondly, the introduction of Spylo as assistant coach. And if you don't know much about the Spylo guy, well, let me tell you. Whilst we can't directly see his impact on the 2021 season, considering he poured 60+ hour work weeks into helping Sheer Cold, which was a tier 2 team, secure top 3 in EU, I think it's pretty reasonable to assume that he had a measurable impact on the Spitfire's performance. And that shows. A key match people seem to have forgotten was the London Spitfire playing against the San Francisco Shock, which not only went 3-2, but the Spitfire were 1 teamfight away from winning that map. Yes, 1 teamfight. Maybe 2 considering overtime. The match was so close that even Super made a video on almost losing to the Spitfire, brushing it off as, oh, we were just trolling, which, judging by how close that last map was, is hardly true. It's kinda crazy to think about how if the Spitfire won a single teamfight, the whole perception of the team would have changed. Now, the Shock obviously weren't at their peak at this time, and in fact, they were pretty mid. But a quote-unquote trash team like the Spitfire shouldn't have even come close to beating mid if we're going down that route. And that wasn't even the closest game the Spitfire had that stage. The 2021 London Spitfire also came very close to beating the Dallas Fuel. Now, whilst the map score might say otherwise, the Spitfire were a single teamfight away from winning 2 maps, being both Busan and Volskaya. The Spitfire could have easily and realistically won this match 3-1. Even after the match, assistant coach Spylo had a few words to say.
Let's put it this way, if I had coached our mentality better, if I'd been more successful in training us, then we're going to be beating Dallas Fuel. Dallas Fuel game, even more so than the Shock game, was ours to lose. With Volskaya and Busan were not maps that we should have lost for any reason.
There's also the public perception of the Spitfire players. In 2021, the majority of the team were released, but arguably the most hated player on the Spitfire, being Hardy, stayed. Unfortunately, because the casual community don't understand how player trials work, nor do they understand how and why main tank players often look like they're feeding, a large portion of the community were outraged to say the least. Spylo had this to say about Hardy in 2021.
If you want a clip to throw onto Reddit, here's one. The guy that has been brutally made fun of this entire season, who mechanically might be our best player up there with Sparker, has been consistently the most positive and hard-working member of the team the entire season. Not at a single moment has there been like, oh, Hardy's not giving it all, or, Hardy's not putting in the work. Despite every loss, despite all the crap that he's been put under, Hottie has consistently given his best effort and played well. He's a victim of the main tank thing where he looks worse than he actually is because he's trying to overperform under pressure.
And of course, Spylo had the last laugh. Massive L for those who doubted the Chaddy. In reality, the 2021 Spitfire weren't trash, at least by the end of the season. They were mid, but mid is a lot better than trash. For some reason, the entire Overwatch League community somehow did a Men in Black memory erase, and everyone forgot that these two matches even happened. But these were pivotal in forming my own predictions for London's success this year, and speaking of predictions, the year's 2022. The league has no sponsors, Overwatch hasn't released a hero in almost 2 years, and people are getting prepared for watching a game that they can't even play.
People don't want to watch a game that they can't play.
Cuz says it right, like, there's not even replay viewers. No one can even look at the point of views.
Man, the good times. Anyways, whilst the league, and frankly the game, were decaying like a piece of uranium, the Spitfire were making moves. Just as the 2021 season ended, the Spitfire signed head coach Christopher, who had previously worked for a top team being the Philadelphia Fusion, bringing alongside the flexible, versatile, and talented contenders DPS backbone, the French veteran Poco, the British degenerate Provide, which we all know how that went.
This is 4K! How did they get you at 4K?
That ain't me.
And the richest man in Estonia, Admiral. Landon soon joined the team as well after the whole debacle with Provide. Go watch this video here to find out more. Overall, I'd say that this was definitely an upgrade from the previous roster, but people obviously weren't convinced. People had doubts surrounding Poco and whether he was washed.
The only concern really comes through his lack of playtime in recent years. Due to his visa issues, he didn't play at all in 2021, not a single map.
People had doubts about Landon and whether he could become Overwatch League level in such a short period of time, and people certainly had reservations about Hardy being re-signed back onto the roster.
Like, is he just going to have Poco play a lot of the time because he's a more gifted talent than Hardy is, even on main tanks?
I'm worried about Hottie as a player for this team.
As a result, you had almost every single content creator not only doubting the potential of the Spitfire, but placing them dead last. But the way I and many other Spitfire fans saw it, at least, was that this was a direct upgrade from the previous roster. And as just established, the 2021 roster wasn't even trash towards the end of the season. Hardy was severely rated going into this year, the Spitfire have some of the best Western Overwatch coaches in the world in my opinion, and every role was a direct upgrade. Not to mention, you know how in FIFA you used to get soft chemistry links by just having the players play on the same team? Well, the same kinda applies here with the Spitfire. Obviously, there's the link between Christopher and Poco, considering they were both on the Fusion, but there's also the link between Backbone and Spylo, who are both on the same contenders team, Sheer Cold.
Backbone and Rethel are both DPS with Sheer Cold that I worked with, and they're both kind of like, not no names, but people didn't respect them very much, and I got to work a lot with them on their like mental and their confidence and things like that, and they worked very hard themselves, and now they're like considered like to be like the best in their role in the regions that they play in, and they're both phenomenal players, and they're both really hard work, and they're both down to earth, and they both aren't ego, and to be honest, these guys have a very solid chance of reaching Overwatch League.
The last thing I want to mention is possibly the biggest strategic reason for why the Spitfire improved so much from the first season, which is the improvement in communication. Back in 2021, Spylo even said himself that the reason why players like Hardy would look like he was feeding was just solely down to messy communication.
The thing with Hottie, it actually tilts me. This guy is actually really good at the game, and he's a really good communicator, and he has a phenomenal mental strength. But the second anything gets difficult, your main tank gets thrown in the dustbin. I guarantee you that there was a super confusion about what was actually happening or what was going on. And so Hottie looks like a jackass, and then you're gonna go on Reddit and talk trash about him.
But in my interview with Christopher, he said himself that the things that distinguished the Spitfire from other teams at the same skill level was communication. Especially at the start of the season and compared to like other teams around your budget range, what was the key difference between you guys succeeding and them not?
One of the benefits of having a full Western roster is that, this is what we said from the very start, was that we will never ever be able to be out-communicated by a mixed team. It's just not possible. Our communication has to be at a high enough level where the only teams that can compete with us in like a team play and a communication aspect are teams like Dallas or like full Korean teams or full Western teams. Any team that has a mixed team that doesn't have like perfect language, we cannot allow it to like them to have better team play than us. If they have better mechanics, they have better mechanics, but they can't have better team play. And I think that was a massive factor, especially if you start to talk about like those like Vancouver, those Boston, like those teams around us which like are slightly mixed. I think we were able to, like, especially in team play metas, right? Like, if you're starting to look at the Rhine comp, obviously, but then the Jungle Queen comp and the Winston comp at the end, those, like, macro metas, those team play metas, we were able to do very good because everybody in our team was able to communicate at a high level, listen at a high level. We did various PowerPoints or VOD reviews at the start about, like, how to access, like, level 1, level 2, level 3 communication and stuff like that. And that was a real mantra for us, which is that if teams out-mechanic us and beat us, that's life, but no team will have better team play and no team will have better communication.
I think it's really important to note this, especially as we go into each stage, with how the strict approach to communication amplified the Spitfire's performance, especially with the comps they were playing in each meta. But now, with the stage set for the Spitfire, it's time to dive into stage 1 of 2022, the Kickoff Clash. Before I actually get into the first match of the Spitfire's season, I think it's important to note the mentality and mindset the Spitfire were in from the very get-go.
One thing I did when I came into this team from literally the first day I spoke to the team was I spoke about the expectations and how a team like us can get caught away thinking we should win every game. And I very much identified, I said, for us to have a successful season, it's not to go to tournaments to win this or to do this.
So, with this being said, Spitfire's first match was to be played against the San Francisco Shock, and to nobody's surprise, they fall short with an 0-3 loss. And to be frank, it wasn't close. Spitfire struggled to utilise their Reinhardt comp against Shock's dive comp when attacking Eichenwald second, and some of their slightly gimmicky strats with the Mei on Lijiang didn't come to fruition. Proper is also proper, so there's that. But this 0-3 was swiftly equalised with a surprising 3-0 against the Vancouver Titans. Still, since Vancouver were a bottom of the barrel team, this didn't really sway the opinion of the likes of Platchat, for example.
I don't think London Spitfire is like a great team at all. I
agree as well. I don't think London's that good either.
Yeah, it's the Goomba test. Like, you just have to jump over this Goomba and you advance to the next phase. And the Vancouver Titans, they just walked straight into it and they failed.
But to be fair to the Spitfire, it was reasonable to be skeptical at this point. Looking at this stage, they came 9th place with a 3-3 records with a -2 map differential, just missing out the Kickoff Clash by 2 maps. Their schedule was a decent challenge, all things considered, with tough teams like the Gladiators and Shock, middling to upper teams like Houston and Atlanta, and lower teams like Boston and Vancouver. The match here I want to draw attention to is actually the one against Atlanta for various reasons. Firstly, this is Spitfire's first upset of the year, and kind of sets a turning point of where this team can go. Secondly, the obvious drama this sparked about how Atlanta were blacklisting the Spitfire. I'm just going to play an excerpt from Spilo describing the situation from his POV at the time.
We got the impression that Atlanta was not going to take a scrim with us seriously from what they had done with us and what they communicated. Now, the communication was probably a misunderstanding on both sides. The guys won't take you seriously until you actually have a flex support. That's probably the more likely. Less, Atlanta has had a reputation of trolling scrims and then trolls our scrims, and we're thinking, okay, well, they're just not taking us seriously. What's the, right? We think, okay, well, I guess we're blacklisted because of what they said, which was a miscommunication. But then Atlanta also didn't reach out to us at any point in time. Draw from what conclusions from that you will.
The community on Twitter were also having fun poking Atlanta, from Gator, a tank player on Atlanta known for his ego, blocking everyone that critiqued him in the slightest, and Mooseman calling it the blockchain, which also makes fun of Gator being heavily into crypto. And then there's Hardy's own tweet making fun of the drama with him and Sparker at the gym. Speaking of the gym, I think it's very important to highlight the dedication the players on the Spitfire not only had in the game, but outside of it too. Even Sparker mentioned it briefly on an interview with Yiska.
Outside of the game, we read like meditation and shit, books. Most of our team goes to the gym now. We do things that like put the nerves down or like increase our heart rate, so stuff like that gets easier so we can actually play to our top performance in official matches as well.
You yourself had a pretty impressive transformation. I saw on Twitter. You put on a couple of pounds of muscle, right, this year?
Yeah, been at it for months now.
And I questioned Chris on how he got his players to do these good habits in the first place. How do you get your players to do all the good habits, or like enforce a structure where you make them wake up at 8 AM and do that sort of thing?
Well, the important thing to note about the team runs is it was not mandatory. That's really important, because it was not, you have to get out of bed and go. It's, I'm going to run at 8 AM. If you guys want to come, I would recommend it. And then what happens is there is a few guys who really believe in this side of it, right? Like, I think Harry would always be like, oh yeah, I'm coming. And then that would eventually like mean that Landon was really like bought into this stuff. Then all of a sudden the guys that maybe don't want to go, they see a few guys already going, and it's like, it's almost like peer pressure, right? Like, oh, okay, I guess I'll go too. And that's how it all goes, I think.
I also want to raise the Gladiators game in conjunction with the Atlanta one too, considering that, according to Spilo, London could have 3-0'd the Reign, and London could have certainly won against the Gladiators.
We went into that game not expecting a 3-0, but we were pretty confident we could 3-0 Reign, given the map pool. And we were also pretty confident versus Glads as well. I mean, Dorado is just a heartbreaker, man. Like, I can't even communicate like how painful that was.
In terms of compositions for this stage, teams were playing a bunch of shit at this point. From Doom Reaper Lucio Moira Rush Dive, to Winston Tracer Dive, to Zarya Reaper comps, the Spitfire still actually played Reinhardt predominantly. Arguably, this highlights more of Chris's coaching, since you need to have a great macro understanding of playing the Reinhardt comp into a wild variety of different heroes. Stage 1 also importantly set a precedent for the Spitfire in terms of their coaching style and the team buying into Chris's vision for how he views Overwatch for the rest of the season. What is your general philosophy towards the game and towards teams as well?
I always coach to how to win a map as opposed to win team fights. So we need to make sure that we don't put ourselves in a position, even if we lose this first fight, to lose the next fight. And I think that our team, especially as the season went on, like I think that was a big thing for us was stage 1. People were maybe not super bought into the way that I see Overwatch. But as we started to see results, everyone just became yeah, let's just play this way, you know? And then what I desperately tried to do is create a system. Like I think this is what I learned from like KDG and Fusion in season 3 was you need to have like a neutral theory, you need to have a how to hold a choke theory, you need to have a retake theory, you need to have an ult disadvantage theory, you need to have an ult advantage theory, and you need to have a system of how to push payload and how to stop payload. If you have like those 7 things, and the ult economy is obviously a bit more like expansive, then that's my goal. If I have those 7 things in every single meta, then everybody knows how to play. And that's one of the reasons why I felt like week 1 was always a bit ropey, but once you started to get into week 2 and week 3 of a stage, I think we started to look stronger.
All in all, this was a decent stage for the Spitfire, showing that they certainly had potential to go further. They surpassed expectations even in the first week against the Titans, and were only 2 maps away from going to Dallas in the Kickoff Clash. From here on out though, the trajectory of the Spitfire only goes up. Entering the second stage of the 2022 season with the Midseason Madness, London had a pretty easy strength of schedule, facing Florida, Toronto, New York, Paris, Washington and Dallas, beating each and every one of those teams apart from Dallas, meaning they had a 5-1 record. The Midseason Madness is what I'd say is the key turning point for most people in terms of how they viewed the Spitfire from being a garbage team to a team that actually has some teeth to their bites.
2 matches into the Midseason Madness tournament, however, there's only one thing I can say. I was wrong.
The key match here I'd say would be against the Justice, since it sparked some drama on Twitter with Pre and Christopher. Essentially, during the Spitfire and Justice series, the Justice made what most people thought was a bad coaching call by choosing to mirror London on their own Reinhardt comp, and to nobody's surprise, they got rolled. Pre decided to tweet and cry about it on Twitter, eventually getting ratioed by Christopher, mocking the tweet for how short-sighted it was. There was also DPay from the Titans, who commented on London's Reinhardt comp being better than what people thought, while some interpreted DPay negatively, implying that London cheesed their way to the 5-1 records. He later clarified in a Reddit thread that he's actually really proud of the Spitfire and their players, and that they deserve their wins. Spilo later subtweeted by saying how, if Reinhardt was so good, why aren't teams playing and learning it? Which is a fair point, considering Batmay into a Sojourn Zen Nanoblade meta isn't necessarily fun or easy. And again, I think this highlights the ingenuity and pluckiness of the Spitfire, who are constantly fighting an uphill battle. However, arguably, it didn't even seem that way. It even seemed at points the Spitfire were the big dogs. After all, they just made it to Hawaii with a 5-1 record, making them top 5 in the league at this point, and Hardy, during an interview with Yesker before the Midseason Madness, stated himself that Atlanta had actually gotten worse since the time London played them, and he turned out to be right.
You already know your opening matchup. It's the Atlanta Reign, which is poetic. What do you think that game is going to look like?
I think we're gonna roll them. I think, to be honest, they've gotten worse than before. When we played them and we won versus them, I think they were in their peak, and now they've just gotten worse, so it should be an easy matchup for us.
In fact, they made such a turnaround that even Bad Pachimari decided to make a quick meme.
I fear no man, but that thing, it scares me.
No, I ain't talking about that freak, alright? He's not here, is he? How do I get this fucking thing off?
bridge! Backbone!
However, it's not all sunshine and rainbows for the Spitfire. They ended up losing 3-1 to the Shock in a competitive but not convincing series, and worst of all, they lost to the Florida Mayhem via a reverse sweep. This was obviously a tough loss to swallow for the Spitfire, considering how competitive they were against theoretically better teams like Atlanta, Glads, Shock and Dallas at points. I'll expand more on the Florida-London arc throughout. Before I move on to the Summer Showdown though, I'd also briefly like to note this meme Hardy posted of Backbone on Twitter when they beat the Eternal. Speaking of the Eternal, I do want to cover how Chris feels about now being the only team to represent EU Overwatch, especially after the Paris Eternal rebranded to the Las Vegas Eternal. With the Paris Eternal rebranding to Las Vegas soon, what is it like representing EU and even OK Overwatch, UK Overwatch at such a high level, not to mention you and Commander X, British coaches as well?
I think it's really nice. I think I've got like a lot of DMs and I think we've got a lot of support from European fans, maybe even fans that were on like Paris last year. People that say, yeah, I really wanted Europe to be represented. It was like a bit disappointing, especially when there was a time when like both Paris and London were like full Korean basically. What I really wanted to become was London would become a destination where any like up and coming European player, the first team they want to join, I mean ultimately maybe they want to join like Gladiators or Shock or one of like the big boys, but the first destination was I would love to join London. I'd love to like learn their system, play within their system, grow, and then if after that I move on up, then that's okay. But I think that's what I wanted, and that was always the problem we had in the first off season was no one wanted to join London, and I'm hopeful in this off season that that's no longer the case.
Lastly, I'd like to mention the signing of Bone back to the London Spitfire, which is obviously a testament to Backbone's versatility and flexibility to play flex support. Whilst this was an entire meme on Twitter and on the IRL broadcast, for those who are more sophisticated by being the average Spylo viewer, you'd know that Backbone and even Shax already played flex support for the Spitfire whilst they were searching for a replacement flex support after the whole Provide situation, and they ended up doing pretty well.
This may have been the time where we had, I think Shax was playing Baptiste for a couple of days, like 3 or 4 days. What's funny though, is we actually were doing quite well. We actually were winning almost every single scrim with Backbone on flex support and Shax on flex support. Yeah, Backbone and Shax were actually smoking, folks. Backbone will back me up in this one.
So for the keen Spylo fans out there, seeing Bungback seriously play and pop off even in the actual Midseason Madness tourney wasn't a surprise.
Oh, what is that? I haven't even got to the bridge. Oh, Backbone! He kills OG just as soon as he respawned. He puts him right back in there.
Yeah, I think it might be right. OG with a lull as well. Look.
Now entering the Summer Showdown, we have the dreaded Jotes meta. For those unenlightened, Jotes is the Jungle Queen Rush composition that dominated both Eastern and Western regions for the entirety of the Summer Showdown. Since I'm an amateur Overwatch coach, I just have to sprinkle in a bit of analysis by British Overwatch coach and content creator KodaKett on how the Jotes matchup works.
Here we see a good example of Toronto running this default on Queen Street versus Atlanta, where they're about to take this rough setup that enables them to skirmish while having their escapes open and having the threat of a trade when Atlanta push. Atlanta walk up and see a chance to dash onto Hisu with Shout. Hisu slides away while Hopper immediately starts the trade with Rampage, which zones Kai and forces Beat. Atlanta attempt to follow through, but because of Toronto's initial setup, Twilight and Hisu were able to escape, while their frontline have an easy time trading out on Atlanta's Brig and Queen.
Essentially, as a result of the Jotes meta, a bunch of teams went up and down in the power rankings, with both the Gladiators and the Atlanta Reign missing out on the Summer Showdown, but the Vancouver Titans and Washington Justice somehow making it in, thanks to the records being reset to give lower teams a more equal chance to reach the tournaments. London just managed to scrape by with the 3-3 records, losing to the Mayhem, Reign and Justice, but winning against Boston, Houston and Toronto. But to be honest with you, as a London fan, I kinda wish London missed this tournament, considering the way they went out, but we'll get to that. Out of the 6 matches London played, the key ones are all of them, I'd say. The Spitfire losing the Mayhem match foreshadowed their later defeat. Their Boston victory shows the Spitfire gaining more and more confidence with the Jungle Queen meta. The Reign and Justice losses, but also wins against Houston and Toronto, show their inconsistency when it came to performing on the Jotes composition. Every match played some part in the Spitfire arc. However, in particular though, I would like to draw attention to the Houston 3-0, since many people like Custer called it a fluke, and whilst I myself think Houston fucked up their macro and alt play, the Spitfire knew what they were doing and were playing at their peak. If you're wondering why Outlaws still lost this fight, despite investing all their ultimates, they should not have stacked their Bob or Rally, and for some reason, the Outlaws use Beats. If the Outlaws traded their ultimates a bit more effectively, they could have easily won this fight and snowballed it into a full cap. This was the infamous moment where Spylo claimed that Backbone was a top 5 Genji in the league, which I made fun of on Twitter, and he later deleted the Discord comments since I can't find it on his Discord. Still, Spylo and Backbone, if you're watching, there's certainly a valid point here in that Backbone did actually look like a top 5 Genji against Houston, and that the factor that differentiates Backbone from top level DPS players like Proper or Kevster or Pelican is consistency. Those players can consistently perform at the top level, their performance never fluctuates, they just always show up. Another match I'd like to bring attention to is, well, the Summer Showdown in general. Chris stated that he wanted to go into the Summer Showdown with a warrior mentality, which, as you'll see, didn't really end up being the case. London once again had a good start, beating Toronto, then losing to a top 3 team being Dallas, and then you guessed it, losing to Florida. London went out not only to the Florida Mayhem yet again, but it was also another reverse sweep, and it was the consecutive tournaments.
Every time you're on the cusp of greatness, you run into the Florida Mayhem of all teams. How are they in such a vicious cycle with them? A loser's bracket run seemed like a real possibility this time around, especially with the Gladiators and Reign nowhere to be found. How can we ever take them 100% seriously when stuff like this always seems to happen?
Imagine losing to the exact same team twice in a row, in the exact same position, in the exact same reverse sweep fashion. Honestly, every London fan was on some extreme dosage of copium, and even Spylo was confused by the loss. Speaking of Spylo, this was the stage where, due to budgetary constraints by C9, who owned the Spitfire, Spylo was released by the Spitfire, and they decided to pick up Khan instead as a future investment, but as we now know, that future investment didn't last very long. There was rightful outrage at this because the Spitfire, at the time, announced the departure of Boneback just 2 days before Spylo's release, but there was no graphic made for Spylo at all. In fact, fan-made graphics for Spylo did more of a service to him than the official release post by the Spitfire, considering how drab and dead it was. Returning back to the summer shit show, it probably was the point in time that stung the most for the Spitfire players, as Chris even mentioned it in my interview with him.
Maybe the only downside we had through the whole season was we felt at Hawaii we probably should have done better. Like, we felt we were a better team than to finish last. We just kind of choked against Florida. And I think especially in the Junker Queen meta, we really felt like that was like a top 3 finish for us, like really like based on scrims before. At the very least, we'd obviously beat Houston in the official, we'd beat Toronto in the official. So again, to go out like early against Florida was disappointing.
I'll get onto how the Spitfire managed to overcome this in the Countdown Cup and in the playoffs. Time to either make it or break it. I'm gonna breeze through the Countdown Cup and make it to the playoffs since there's bigger fish to fry. The Spitfire finished with an exactly neutral record, and that's mainly down to the Spitfire playing against the 3 easiest teams in the league, being the Eternal, Titans and New York, but also playing against the 3 hardest teams in the league, being the Shock, Dallas and Gladiators. It's important to note that, actually, during the Countdown Cup, the meta was actually quite diverse because Kiriko hadn't been added to the league yet, despite Overwatch 2 being released when everyone was playing Kiriko. In fact, the meta shift away from a diverse range of Zarya, Winston and D.Va comps to just the Winston, Lucio, Kiriko meta worked heavily in favour of the Spitfire, and it shows in the playoffs. A team built around communication would obviously thrive in a hive mind meta built around communication, and this wasn't any clearer than when they not only beat the LA Gladiators, but did so in such a convincing manner.
We've been here too many times before to not fucking get it this time. So let's fucking go. I need to see a team that wants to win today. Not a team that just wants to win and hope we get through it. A team that wants to fucking win it.
And the London Spitfire will not be denied. They give up one map, and then they go to push, and they take it all the way home. Gladiators did not hold a candle to them at any singular moment in this map.
It is incredibly shocking that London do beat the LA Gladiators. This is the real deal. That man on the screen right there, Christopher, he has built an incredible team this year. Something to be proud of. I don't think any London fan would have expected their team to make it this far. Maybe you really believe that they would have some really good results, but right now, this is the best they've looked in a damn long time.
Even Landon in the interview afterwards stresses how much emphasis Christopher and the team had placed on communication.
Since I joined this team, we had really realistic expectations set for us, that if we wanted to be a really good team, we had to focus on things that other teams didn't. And Christopher, an amazing coach, really put that focus on communication, that no matter what else, we should always be communicating better than the enemy team.
And here's something I haven't even brought up yet. Yiska's budget tier list. This shows or estimates the budget of each team in the league and really showcases how big of an achievement this is for the Spitfire. The second poorest team in the league convincingly demolishing the richest team in the league. How often do you hear of that? Not just in Overwatch, not just in eSports, but in sports as a whole. Now, the Spitfire did go out against a very strong and competent Houston Outlaws, and then got defeated by the Spark 3-1 in a game where I honestly do think London underperformed and could have definitely made top 4. But, looking at the season in the bigger picture, it's really tough to be disappointed with how they played. So the first thing I have to ask is, when looking at the entire season holistically, how do you feel about how the season went?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's like too many things that we can complain about. Obviously, the finish of top 6 is like beyond any expectations. I think the fact that we finally got to a tournament at the end and performed like the way we wanted to was good. With playoffs, we were finally able to overcome like one of the big top 3 teams, which we hadn't done all season. We were finally able to push in a position in a tournament like past like a disappointing level. And even though, yeah, I think there's an argument that we could have like done better, I think top 6 is probably a relatively fair assessment of where we were. And then obviously, yeah, like if we always talk about it, right, like bringing it back to where we were at the start of the season and what people expected, then yeah, it's almost impossible to complain about where the season went.
I guess like a kind of follow-up-ish to that with the whole expectation thing. You did an interview with Yiska at the start of this year, and you mentioned that like the first thing you did was keep realistic expectations with the Spitfire from the very beginning. Did those expectations ever fluctuate throughout the season?
I think absolutely. I think that like we went into like, if you said to us at the start of the season, would you ever like, we honestly said we're probably not going to compete even against teams like Washington and Toronto. Our goal was never to beat those teams. If we can, great, but it was never a situation where it's like, oh yeah, we need to beat these teams. But after stage 1 and especially after stage 2, all of a sudden those type of fixtures that we looked forward to said, well, yeah, like we should be winning it. Like we're clearly like in the same level as them. So expectations like certainly increased as the season went on, but it was important for us not to lose track of, if you change your expectations to, oh, we have to beat these teams, if you lose, then that can kind of like break the mental and snowball in the opposite direction.
And to top things off, the London Spitfire finished with the last laugh, with Florida being knocked out by the Spark. I haven't even gone onto the awards the Spitfire had won, with Hardy getting an MVP nomination and winning the Dennis Hawelka Awards.
For you, so much of your time was spent shifting the spotlight to the rest of your teammates and lifting them up as well and empowering them as well to become maybe leaders in their own right one day. I just want to take a second to maybe hear from you if you have a message to everybody out here in the arena and everybody at home, all the fans of Hardy and the London Spitfire and everything you guys have managed to do. I'd like to share a few words with them.
We're really, like, everyone in the Spitfire is so grateful for the whole support, for the fans, especially for the fans sticking around after last season and still having faith in us, trusting in us. We really love you. We appreciate it so much. Thank you, guys.
Ladies and gentlemen, Hardy, your Dennis Hawelka Award winner!
And Christopher, of course, winning Coach of the Year. I asked Chris what he thought himself were his best aspects as a coach, and he gave a pretty holistic answer.
I always thought that to be a really good head coach, you have to be able to do both, you know? Like, there's a lot of head coaches which only do, like, the motivation side, and a lot of them that only do the, like, Overwatch side, but I really think that if you want to be a good head coach, you have to do both. I think if you're good at one, it makes the other one, like, the players buy into this side if they also believe in this side. And I think that was, like, my goal. Like, I think there is almost certainly coaches in the league that have better motivation or leadership style. I'm almost certain there's better coaches who understand Overwatch better than me. But I like to think if you put them all together, that I become quite a well-rounded coach. And I think that was like my idea. I think that if I can explain to a player how I want them to play and they see it and trust it, then when I also tell him, I also really think you should go to bed at 10 p.m. tonight and wake up at 8 a.m. and go for a run, it makes it more believable, you know? If you're one of these coaches which is like doesn't understand the game at all, I think it becomes quite easy for players to buy out of your system because like, oh, well, this guy's just a motivational coach. He just like reads mantras and we have to follow it. But I think if they can see that, like, I understand the game and I understand the aspects of being an athlete and being a professional, I think that becomes like a strength for any like head coach, I think myself included.
Speaking of great coaches, I do want to give the London Spitfire assistant coach Commander X a massive shout out. I think a lot of people view Commander X like the DJ Khaled of the team in like, what does he do? But here's Spilo elaborating on that.
Commander X runs stats in all of our scrimmages. Headshots, ult efficiency, deaths per 10, defensive assists, so on. What he does is he goes, this is an anomaly. We have an unbelievably high first deaths with Baptiste, or we have an abnormally low ult fight win percentage with Reinhardt or Shatter. That is used as an impetus for us to investigate and decide if there's something wrong. Was it just bad luck? Is it something as a team our playstyle is wrong? Is it something that the individual needs to do better? And what Commander X is very good at is because he's also a good coach and he understands strategy, he's not just an analyst, he can often interpret those numbers and say, our Reinhardt Shatter win percentage was really bad. I think Hadi's communication in them, or what the targets that he's looking for could be better. He will either feed it to me, or he did feed it to me, so I would work on the player one-on-one. He'd feed it to Chris, so something to VOD review as a team adjustment. And sometimes he would just flat up record a 3-minute YouTube video and give it to the players individually as individual feedback.
I also want to add in Nuki, and for those who don't know, she's the GM for the Spitfire. Whilst I don't exactly know the job of a GM, and I could be completely wrong on this, I assume she's made the lives and logistics of the Spitfire players very clean, easy and straightforward to navigate, so the players can focus on other things. Considering that the Spitfire finished top 6 and were at worst mid in different metas, Chris also wanted to dispel the myth of Spitfire being some kind of Reinhardt OTP team that just got lucky.
Since stage 1, we've won so many games playing not Reinhardt comps, but I've logged into Twitter the other day, right? The only way for London to win playoffs is if it's a Ryan meta, and all they talk about, somehow we could beat Frio Houston in Jungle Queen meta, and there's probably what a Ryan performance from the London Spitfire. We don't even play the hero sometimes. Hawaii, we barely played it. We took maps off Shock playing mirror double flex support, Backbone on Zen. Oh, they're just too reliant on the Reinhardt. It's like a horrible, lazy narrative. In stage 1, it was the case, right? I can't argue all of our wins came off Reinhardt, but since stage 1 onwards, we've played the meta. It's unbelievable how being the best Reinhardt in the world somehow is a negative to the rest of your hero pool, you know? Like, imagine being able to play every other hero, but you have one hero that you are so insanely good at that your team can craft a strategy around it, which no other team in the league can pull off, and that's a negative to you. Oh, Hadi must be bad because it's so dumb. Like, nobody actually has critical thinking skills.
So, when looking at the differences between the playoffs and the Spitfire choking in the Midseason Madness and the Summer Showdown against the same team, what was different? Well, 2 main factors: experience and mentality. This wasn't only London's third LAN, but some of you may have caught some of the Spitfire players barking after they won a teamfight.
He's barking! He's barking the camera!
This may seem like a small thing, but Chris actually placed emphasis on this sort of thing to switch mentalities.
Was we tried to go into a different mentality. We realized in scrims, especially in this meta, if we went big dog mode and we put in 100% energy, maybe too much energy, we would literally just bark after we won a team fight, just as some sort of I don't know. It sounds stupid, but it kind of worked, and that didn't allow us necessarily, didn't allow the time in our heads for the negative voices to creep in. And then we were, even when we lost the Spark and lost to Houston, it wasn't the same as the Florida losses, right? It wasn't a mental collapse, it was just they were the better team. And if you lose because a team is the better team, what can you say, you know?
He who says he can and he who says he can't are both usually right. Confucius. It's clear as daylight that the Spitfire were not just criminally underrated at the beginning, but at every stage. They punched above their weight in each of the 4 quarters, beating the Reign in stage 1, beating them again in stage 2, beating Houston in stage 3, and beating Gladiators in stage 4. Imagine telling someone last year that the Spitfire would finish higher than the LA Gladiators and would have beaten them in a very convincing manner. Platchat would have sent you to the nearest Overwatch mental asylum with your mental diagnosis as being off the goop.
I'm ready to put number 20. I'm ready to put number 20 on the board.
I am ready as well. All right, Connor.
London Spitfire.
I put the UK Massive at number 20.
Yeah, the London Spitfire don't give off much confidence at all. I know they made a lot of changes and they've got new coaching, some exciting things are going on, but they still fall way short of the benchmark.
We've all picked London in the last place.
Overall, this is what a top team looks like. The second poorest team in the league adopting the big dog mentality when facing Goliaths and actually seeing success with it. with players who are a lot more talented than what the community gives them credit for.
I think the community and then also like the Overwatch League broadcast is like doing their best to tell you that like our team is just full of players who can't aim and are terrible, and like we're just like beating teams because every single time we win a game, unfortunately the other team had a bad game. Like, oh, it's a real shame for the 16th time this season London has just faced a team that's had a bad game. 3-0 Houston. No, it just wasn't the same Houston that we normally play. Every time we win it, we just talk about how the other team is bad, and I think that's like obviously like, I think it hurts because I think we have so much better players than people realize. Like, I think on an individual level, I think our players are so much better than anyone gives them credit for. So I'm glad we did get one MVP nomination, and I think like obviously I think Hattie deserves it as much as anybody on the team.
Communication, mentality, being in person, great coaching staff, being quick to understanding the meta, and developing good habits are the factors that I believe gave the Spitfire that razor-sharp edge over the competition. The story of the Spitfire shows you that you can really do a little with a lot, that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, and that most importantly, better people make better gamers. I'll finish this off with what Chris has to say for his Spitfire plans in 2023 and a short montage of the Spitfire. Last question, and this is linked to the off-season. I'm sure you can't disclose too much, and maybe you haven't even thought about it that much, but what are like your plans for 2023?
I think our plans will become very similar. I don't know when you're gonna like post this, but I think it's not impossible that our off-season is completed within a week. Most teams are in a situation where they are like, let everybody go in free agent, but I think we will 100% be the first team finished with the off season. I think we already have a very solid idea of the players that we want, and I'm hopeful that they are as enthusiastic to join us as we are to have them to join us, if that was good English. And then I think we're in a situation where I've always believed, because I'm a big football fan, and I've always believed, especially being a Manchester United fan, that the teams that get their business in the off season done first are always the best. If you're one of these teams that's like a week before the deadline and you're scrambling, trying to find players, blah, 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 you're always going to make a mess. So we very quickly assessed where we wanted to add players or do whatever. And I think we were in a situation where we started very, very fast. So I think you will see a very similar London Spitfire in terms of like the team identity and the team culture. And I think it's very possible that we are finished our off season within a week from today.
Give me that Nessie, give me that root, give me that bar.
They don't know! Oh, Hardy! Jawline so sharp, they called Excalibur. The man comes in with a big three hammer.
He's barking the camera.
Backbone is just plus boarding. No
food! Give me that Rogan, give me that woo. Hit it like H-Town, knocking them boots. 30-30, and I think now the truth. Frank Lucas got my bitch feeling blue. Straight! Cracking the booth. Hit it like speed, won't stop me, not you. Couldn't shop at the store and had EBT 2, now it's thinking back on. Turn that money through.
I hope you guys, especially the Spitfire fans, enjoyed this video. Sorry for the month delay on this thing. This video has taken a long time to research, script, voice record and edit, so I hope it was worth it. And who knows, maybe your team will get a feature-length video like this one next year. Until next time.